As I think I've mentioned before, some of Emerson's biographers attribute a lot of the ideas in Self-Reliance to Aunt Mary Moody, who, you remember, was the spinster aunt of the Emersons, who went from family crisis to family crisis, straightening everybody out, and who told the Emerson boys that all of every difficulty in life is actually an opportunity for heroism. What's he really talking about in Self-Reliance? Making your own money, paying your own bills? Self-Reliance, Ralph Waldo Emerson? Is it ringing a bell with anybody? Let's talk about moral self-reliance. What's the ultimate thing you have to do if you're a transcendentalist? Be yourself. Everybody is a unique version of the oversoul. Everybody's a unique version of the good, and that's what you have to be. So self-reliance is really about relying on yourself morally. Now, don't forget that Emerson is living in a times when young America is trying to get out from under old America, and if you're young, nobody listens to your ideas. That's why he talks about the young man who seems tongue-tied when he's around older people like Emerson, but when you hear him talking with his peers, he sounds brilliant. And Emerson wants to know, well, why doesn't he talk like that all of the time? And, of course, he's really talking about that idea of the establishment and how it decides what ideas are valid and what ideas aren't. And do you have to pay any attention to the establishment? No. You're yourself. You've got a unique set of ideas. It doesn't matter what the majority believes or what the previous generation believes. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. Do you then try to impose that truth on everybody? No, not if you're a transcendentalist. You have to let them get to their own truth. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. You read somebody who's famous, some famous philosopher, and you notice he's saying stuff that you thought all the time, but you never said it. And when you read them, why does he say a certain alienated majesty? Well, to one thing, they're kind of majestic because they're alien to us. They're from somebody else. This is Emerson saying this, so it must be more important. But I think he also means alienated in the sense that when you're alienated from somebody, you're separated from them. And so your ideas are estranged from yourself. And you recognize them almost as this long-lost people who almost become strangers to you. When these ideas come back from somebody else, you haven't thought them for so long, you gave them up, where you thought, well, if I thought them, I guess they can't be that original. People must have thought this 100 times before. Granted, certain ideas sort of circulate as assumptions under other current ideas. But nevertheless, when you come up with a thought that's the same as what Emerson had, it's just as hard for you to have come up with that thought as it was for Emerson to come up with it. Sure, he was the first, but in fact, he really wasn't the first. Most of the stuff that Emerson says and most of the stuff that Thoreau said had been said long before. I mean, there were plenty of Chinese philosophers who had said that if you own things, you don't own things, they own you, way before Thoreau did. I don't think Thoreau necessarily read him and copied him. Thoreau had the same idea, and when he expressed it, he said, oh, there's what I've read, and then probably read it later, he said, oh, that's what I've always thought. And it comes back, it just sounds more impressive from other people, but it really isn't. Envy is ignorance, and imitation is suicide. Why is imitation suicide? What's your job here to be?
Yourself.
Yourself. So if you imitate other people, you're not being yourself, so the true you dies. Emerson has a belief in fate that's not as strongly expressed by other transcendentalists. Of course, fate would make sense to a transcendentalist. You know, that things are planned and they're going to come out a certain way because everything is the oversoul. And the oversoul is unfolding in the physical world. And it's unfolding towards the good. So there's probably only one way that it can unfold. And to that extent, things are fated. The eye was placed where one ray should fall that it might testify of that particular ray. That is, that the Oversoul put you here to experience certain events, which of course you still are the Oversoul. So in a sense you put yourself here. And those events that you experience are exactly the ones that the Oversoul wants you to have. And even though they may not seem all that pleasant, they're something that the Oversoul knew it would undergo on its way back to its own perfection. And you're put there to experience it. Remember, you're the eyes and the ears of the Oversoul. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron strength. In it we don't. If you had an idea that you have a philosophy of life. Everybody has a philosophy of life. Many of you are probably pretty well developed by now. And if somebody as famous as Emerson came and disagreed with your ideas, would you defend them? A great many people wouldn't. They'd say, oh, I guess I was wrong because Emerson says so. But of course, all Emerson's really saying is, no, you're not wrong. You're you. So your ideas are always right for you. Infancy conforms to nobody. All conform to it, so that one babe commonly makes 4 or 5 out of the adults who prattle and play with it. There's another thing about babies. You ever notice that if you give a baby your little finger to play with, they grab onto it and you almost have to step on their head and pull your finger free? Well, how can a little 20-pound baby hold on that tightly? Because when a baby holds on, it holds on with 100% of its attention and what strength it has. It's absolutely focused on that finger. We're almost never that focused. Most of the time, our energy is dispersed because even though we're paying attention to the present moment, we're continually going off on other ideas and on other thoughts. We don't have that focus that the baby has. That's one of the reasons why the baby can pull everybody in and make. Of course, the baby can't conform to them. But even so, people don't have to react childlessly to a child, but they generally do. And the reason they do is because if you are who you are, other people will conform to you. Even if they have this set of beliefs of what you ought to be, they'll still accept who it is that you are if you are who you are forcefully enough. The nonchalance of boys who are sure of a dinner and would disdain as much as the Lord to do or say ought to conciliate one, that is the healthy attitude to human nature. If you know who you are and you just act like you expect people to accept that, generally they will. People actually take their cue from other people on how to treat them. For example, all those doors that say no admittance, authorized personnel only. Do you ever go through those doors? Nobody goes through those doors but me. When you go through them, do they come and throw you out, or do they let you go? Most of the time.
Let you go.
Most of the time they let you go. If you act like you're supposed to be there, hardly anything. You don't even need a clipboard and a white coat. If you act like you're supposed to be there, even the security people will let you go without questioning. So people take their cues on who you are from you. And if you accept who you are, then everybody else accepts who you are. Society everywhere is a conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. What does he mean by that? Well, when he's talking about society, he's talking about the society of the establishment, the society of the rationalists, of Franklin-like people, and they wanted everybody to be generic. They wanted everybody to be the good citizen. Society doesn't set itself up to allow individuality, and it certainly doesn't encourage it. You may be yourself, but all of the laws are to try to make you like everybody else. And custom is supposed to make you like everybody else. And so to that extent, society conspires to make you into a generic person. That's why it's so hard for everybody to be who it is they really are. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. That makes sense. If you're going to conform, if you're going to go along, you're going to be who the rules tell you to be, and that's not an individual. Am I saying, what have I to do with the sacredness of traditions if I live wholly from within? My friend suggested, but these impulses may be from below, not from above. That is, they're from the devil, they're not from God. I replied, they do not seem to me to be so. But if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. Good and bad are but names, very readily transferable to this or that. The only right is what is after my own constitution. The only wrong is what is against it. If you were a transcendentalist and you realized that your nature was to be a villain, what should you do? You should be the best villain there's ever been. You should throw yourself into it wholeheartedly, if that is really your nature. Now, Emerson assumed that that isn't anybody's nature. Since we're all the oversoul, we're all the good, everybody has a higher nature. And when you figure out what that is, and you conform to it, you couldn't be doing stuff which are from the devil. You couldn't be doing stuff which is evil. Who you are is good. You have to follow that. But he would have to concede that if it was possible, if you could convince him that it was possible for somebody's nature to be evil, then Emerson would have to say then that's what they have to do. They have to be who they are. Your goodness must have some edge to it, else it is none. And then he follows that with, then again, do not tell me, as a good man did today, of my obligation to put all poor men in good situations. Are they my poor? Sounds like something you could have seen up on the wall in the Reagan administration. Well, why doesn't he take any responsibility for the poor? If that's who they're supposed to be, it's up to them. If they want to be the rich, they can be the rich. This is one of the reasons that one of the arguments that people in opposition to transcendentalism have taken often to Emerson, and that is that not everybody can be a self-made person the way Emerson was. That some people don't have the ability, or they don't have the motivation, they don't have the will to do it. And Emerson would probably have argued that that's fine. Not everybody is supposed to, I guess if you want to say be successful, not everybody is supposed to be. There's people who are supposed to be rich and there are people who are supposed to be poor. And you decide which one you are, and once you've made your choices, you don't get to complain about it. I tell thee, thou foolish philanthropist, that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to such men as do not belong to me, and to whom I do not belong. There is a class of persons to whom, by all spiritual affinity, I am bought and sold. For them I will go to prison if need be. But your miscellaneous popular charity, the education at college of fools, the building of meeting houses to the vain end to which many now stand, alms to sots, money to charity to drunkards, and the thousandfold relief societies. Though I confess with shame, I sometimes succumb and give the dollar. It is a wicked dollar, which by and by I shall have the manhood to withhold. But what's he got against reformers and charities? What do charities do for your self-reliance? Do they make you more self-reliant?
No.
No, they generally make you less. It's human nature that if you can get something for nothing, or you can get something by working hard for it, most people will take the easy way. And so to the extent, Emerson would argue, to the extent that you make it easy for them, you corrupt them, you weaken them. Besides, the Reformed societies all want something in return. If they give you charity, they don't just give you money and go away and don't ask what you do with it. They make sure it gets spent on what they think you ought to spend it on. They want some change in your behavior generally. I don't know that Emerson would necessarily have argued about temporary help for people, because he says he does give. But the problem Emerson would have argued with temporary help is that it becomes permanent. That you weaken people by helping. That's why he says that your goodness has to have some edge to it. Otherwise, I guess that whole idea of being an enabler for somebody, that's really Emerson. Emerson says society does that, and all of the reform movements do that, and so you have to oppose them. Do your thing and I shall know you. Do your work and you shall reinforce yourself. Whitman will come up with that same idea about work. In general, the Transcendentalists admired work. They believe work did two things. One, it expresses your character, and two, it shapes your character. That's why he says, show me your work and I will know you. Because how you do your work is usually how you do the rest of your life. When you start cutting corners at jobs, it's not all that long before you start cutting corners on your relationships. Before you start doing everything less than the best that you can possibly do it. And that, of course, is the opposite of what Emerson thinks that you ought to be doing. How you work builds your character, and how you work expresses your character. So to the Transcendentalist, then, work is a good thing. The struggle is a good thing. Struggle in general. Struggle shapes character. For nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure. The other terror that scares us from self-trust is our consistency. Our reverence for our past act or word. Because the eyes of others have no other data for computing our orbit than our past acts. And we are loath to disappoint them. But why should you keep your head over your shoulder? Why drag about this monstrous corpse of your memory, lest you contradict somewhat you have stated in this or that public place? If you want to test whether your friends are your friends, change everything you do by 180 degrees. If you're normally conservative, become flamboyant. If you're normally flamboyant, become conservative. Will your friends accept that? Most of them won't, Mr. Fitzgerald.
If they're your friends.
If they're really your friends, they'll say, you discovered a new side of you. We were amazed. We didn't know that was there. Emerson said, most people though won't. And Emerson says, in fact, that's why, for example, if you want to get off a drug or something, you can't just stop taking the drugs. You got to stop taking those friends, because people get used. You become friends with people, and they figure out how you're going to react next, and that's what makes friends comfortable. You don't even have to. You don't have to talk about a lot of things because you know how they're going to respond and how you're going to respond. When they change overnight, that frightens people. That's what he meant about people have no way of calculating our orbit except by what we normally do. And when we break out of our habit, it becomes scary to our friends. They go, they didn't really know us after all. Or they don't know who we are now. They don't know what we're going to do next. And so all that comfort goes away. And so we keep conforming to the expectations of other people. Why doesn't he worry about contradicting himself? Does the truth change? Does the oversoul change? The oversoul outside of the world, the answer to that is yes and no. The oversoul outside of the world is completely the same. Within the world, though, it's unfolding. So what was true yesterday is not necessarily true today. What Emerson says is you feel in your heart what's true at the moment. And you express that, because that's one of the things you're supposed to do. Besides experiencing this truth, this change in the oversoul, you're also supposed to express it. But that was days ago. Remember, you can have an insight into future morality, what things are going to be in 100 years or what they're going to be in 5 years. So what you said today may have been perfectly true for today, but it's not going to be necessarily true tomorrow or true 5 years from now. So why should we worry about what we said back then, as long as we knew it was true at that moment? The rationalists, of course, think truth is truth, and once you say a thing, you're pretty much stuck with it. But we learn, we get to be wrong. Emerson doesn't even say that you were wrong, because you weren't wrong. If you spoke your heart at the moment, then it was right for that moment, but the moment's going to change. And so instead of trying to conform to your past self, trying to be consistent, consistency doesn't mean anything. It only means anything if the world is static, and the world isn't static. The oversoul is continually changing. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. That's one of the most famous lines out of Emerson. And it perfectly described the society, American society of the 50s, and probably the society we're back in now. The people who have memorized the whole rule book and are always telling you when you're breaking some minor rule, and they're so concerned with that. Most of the time, if you want to get anything done, you have to break the rules. How many of you follow all the rules where you work and go through the proper channels whenever you want something done? Well, and you really have nothing more to learn. We might as well end the course right now. Nobody does. You want to really get things done, you always have to go around the channels. The channels in any bureaucracy are almost always clogged. Idiots run things. So if you go through the channels, you'll just keep bumping into idiot after idiot. If you're smart, you go to secretary and administrative assistant after secretary and administrative assistant. They're the only ones that know what's going on. They're the only ones that can get anything actually done. But if you worry about being consistent and following the rules, then you'll never get anything done. Is there a punishment for not following the rules? If you run into one of those rule lunatics, yeah, there's a big punishment. But most of the time, if you break the rules and you get results, everybody looks the other way. In fact, after a while, you get a reputation for breaking the rules, and so they kind of expect it from you. Computing our orbit, oh, he always breaks the rules. Well, if you show up following the rules all the time one day, nobody will know what to do with you. You really can be yourself if you stop worrying about being yourself. This quote has got to be pasted up on the locker of every serial killer in America. To be great is to be misunderstood. Now you notice everybody really reads that the opposite way. To be misunderstood is to be great. If everybody thinks you're crazy, you must be a genius. Because otherwise, you got to admit you might be and probably are crazy. It is true that to be great is to be misunderstood, because to be great is to be living in terms of a future morality. Well, hardly anybody's going to be able to understand that, because they only understand the past morality and to a little extent the current morality, but they don't know the future. So when you live in terms of the future, nobody's going to understand you. Same way with being an artist. You break new ground. You do things that haven't been done before. And since people are used to things being done in a certain way, they're not going to understand you. That's why so many times writers and even graphic artists don't get recognized until after they've been dead for a long time. Because it takes that long for everybody to get used to the new ideas they had, so that their ideas become commonplace, everybody can understand them, and everybody can accept them. And then by that time, you've got a new set of artists setting up a whole new set of rules. The roses under my window make no reference to former roses or to better ones. They are for what they are. They exist with God today. I think that's one of the few times you'll see God mentioned. And again, that's because Emerson was a minister. Most of them would say the oversoul rather than God. Roses just are. That's why children have such dominant personalities. They just are who they are. This is an idea that people don't normally think of. But again, it's one of those things that once he says it, you realize that it's something you knew all along. It is as easy for the strong man to be strong as it is for the weak to be weak. There's a crisis. There's always somebody who steps up and takes charge. Weak people have no problem getting out of the way. And the strong have no problem coming forward, taking the risks, and organizing everybody else. But what happens if the strong person has to stand aside? What happens if they don't get to step up? Is that easy for them? No. Some people are good at being in control, and they're good at taking charge, and they're even good at taking the risks. But it's because that's their nature, Emerson would say. Some people naturally gravitate towards control, and some naturally give it up. But it's no easier, it's no harder for the person who's good at taking control to do that than it is for the person who relinquishes control to relinquish it. You are your nature, and if you follow your nature, it's easy. If you go against it, it's hard no matter what that nature is. And yet, we give everybody credit for being strong, and we don't give them any credit for being weak. And Emerson says, well, it's not hard to be strong if that's your nature. It's hard to be strong if that isn't your nature, but why should anybody get any more credit for doing what's easy for them to do than anybody else? We fancy it rhetoric when we speak of eminent virtue, like eminent domain where the state can simply push everything out of its way. We do not see the virtuous height that a man or a company of men plastic and permeable to principles by the law of nature must overpower and ride all cities, nations, kings, rich men, and poets who are not. Essentially he's saying what Thoreau says later when he talks about standing up and fighting City Hall. Emerson says you can beat City Hall. You can beat the establishment. You can even beat the moneyed oligarchy that runs everything. If you have principles. Because if you have principles, they never leave you. Your revolt doesn't stop at 5 o'clock. That's why you can fight the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy goes home at 5. But if you are committed to something, if you're committed to a principle, you don't knock off at 5. That commitment is 24 hours a day and every day of the year. And so in the long run, you can wear them down. It is easy to see that a greater self-reliance, a respect for the divinity in man, must work a revolution in all the offices and relations of men, in their religion, in their education, in their pursuits, in their modes of living, their association, in their property, and their speculative views. The more that we allow people to be individuals, the more that's going to change everything. What does he mean by this line? As man's prayers are a disease of the will, so are their creeds a disease of the intellect. Why are prayers a disease of the will? If you're praying for stuff, how much are you doing to accomplish those ends? Nothing. You're busy praying for it. And so you wait to be given things. Emerson of the school believes God helps those who help themselves. Pray, but start putting out the fire in the meantime. If all you do is pray for things, it saps your will to do anything. And if you have a creed, if you have a set of beliefs that have been written down for you, a philosophy or a religion, it's a disease of the intellect because you don't think anymore. You know what the answers are. They're already written down. And so it keeps you from thinking. Insist on yourself. Never imitate. And the last thing that he has to say on self-reliance, a political victory, a rise of rents, the recovery of your sick, or the return of your absent friend, or some other quite external event raises your spirits and you think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it. It can never be so. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. Well, why aren't these good things enough? Why won't they give you peace? You're making more money, your friends are home, the people you were worried about got better. Why can't you depend on that?
You have to be happy within.
You have to be happy within yourself first. Because if the rents go up, the rents can go down. If your source of strength and pleasure and joy comes from outside of you, then you're dependent on those things, and the world changes. You may have good luck today, but the good luck isn't going to run forever. It's going to change, and if what you depend on is external to yourself, it's going to always, sooner or later, it's going to change for the bad. And that's going to, if that uplifts you, that'll drive you down as well. On the other hand, if your source comes from within yourself, if you live by principle, that can't be taken away from you. You may end up poor, you may end up a beggar, but as long as you've always done the right thing, you'll never be humiliated by that. Principle is the only thing that can keep you being who you are. And don't forget, principle is what you feel is right. That's that idea of following your heart. You can never have peace until you are who you are. And no matter how much you get in the meantime or what you get, it isn't going to be enough. Anybody have any questions or comments on Emerson? You can see why he liked Thoreau and why he mentioned Thoreau in this essay as a guy who, being worth a dozen of those fancy city dolls, the guy who takes a different job every year and manages to do it. Because he's self-reliant. No matter where you plop Thoreau down, Thoreau can live. He's a survivor. That's probably why he gave him the land out, or gave him permission to go live out in Walden Pond on his land. Emerson would like to have done it, but again, Emerson is always the theoretician. Even though he talks about self-reliance, he doesn't seem from the outside to really be all that self-reliant. I mean, after all, he's living off the money that came from his first wife. That's not tremendously self-reliant. He does go out and try to earn it, earn more money as a speaker. But he does always have that to fall back on. Now, when he was young and worked his way through college and stuff, he did do a lot of work then. But he doesn't seem as self-reliant as other people. But ultimately, what he's talking about self-reliance is moral self-reliance. And nobody came up with as many new ideas as Emerson did. He didn't ask anybody for them. Anybody have any questions or comments on him?